Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Hello and welcome again to another podcast of Harvesting Wisdom. I have two guests that I've known for quite some time. Rodey Machokoto and Dorie Morales. And everyone knows I'm famous for messing up names, and I got yours after like asking you 25 times. And I've known you for years, but I know you as Rodey. Yeah. So, I want to explain the mission one more time. That's kind of our intro to Harvesting Wisdom. But we're here really to tell the stories of individuals and organizations that embrace sustainability, climate-smart agriculture, land management. We think that it is the future. It's set in place to create a healthy future for our next generations, and it's part of world sustainability. So anyway, thank you both for being here. Dorie, I know the snippets about you guys, your history. Sometimes if you know someone from a long time, you forget to ask, hey, what did you do? And then you're surprised, with what they've done. But you're a U of A grad.
That's correct. And thank you so much for having me today. Yeah. I'm excited
Good to
be
you
here.
So you're a U of A grad. Then you came up and got a certificate at ASU in sustainability. You've been in the magazine space, that's what we call them still, right? Journalism space, working for some national and regional magazines. And it's like any journey through an industry. You've worked for a lot of different types of print and journals. Originally had your own magazine or something that you were working with, sold that, and now you're Green Living Magazine. And a lot of people know Green Living. Is Green Living mostly regional, or have you gone to a national platform with that?
Currently, we distribute the magazine all over Arizona and Maricopa County, Tucson, Flagstaff, Verde Valley. And then we have subscribers from all over the U.S., digitally or print.
And we'll talk much more of detail about the mission of Green Living, but it's Green Living. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Now, Rodey, I know you from being at Agave Farms, and actually both of you, because we used to do food distributions back during the COVID days, and you and I have done projects. But Rodey, you were there, and you were growing food on the property. And I remember, I think your wife and kids were there. I don't know, did you have kids absolutely. And everything? Yeah. So, and I can't even remember which group you worked for, because you had to work for a nonprofit or no individuals were farming. So you had to, which group were you affiliated with?
So I came in, I was supporting, we had a club for kids who were refugee kids primarily from the Asian region. So we were actually helping them. It was primarily called a Pathfinder Club. So we would help them assimilate to the American context.
Was it international refugees?
Yeah, so that they actually, because I was running the club, they mostly were connected with IRC. So we came in through that connection, the International Rescue Committee, yes.
Okay. So, and we ended up having to shut down Agave Farms. We had that for 6 years, and we didn't own the property, and the developer was going to develop, and I don't know whatever happened to that, but
it hasn't been developed yet.
What's that? No, it hasn't even been touched. So I don't know where were they on it, but they're on it. But
you'd be surprised how much of the things the technology we learned from you over there is what we're using in the farming business that my wife and I have launched with both of our businesses.
Great.
You should come and pat yourself on the back when you come and see what we're doing now.
I don't need to pat myself.
we'll pat
I got enough of that. So what what's interesting though is there's so many people that are on that farm and that I met, and when I was talking to you, I think we had introduced you to Dr. Joe, who at the time was not part of our operation, and I told you, he got his degree in community relations or whatever. Oh, that's so. you were working on the PhD, and then you're working on that PhD now. That's, I think, the pit that everybody get. Once you start working on that PhD, it becomes this all-consuming, why did I ever start this thing deal? But soon you're going to be done with it,
Yes.
right? And it'll be worth all you've done. And it's kind of in community, but not. Tell me about the degree.
Right. So the title of it is PhD in Community Resources and Development. So there's different angles that you can focus on. But my focus is essentially how do you transform systems, particularly to the betterment of communities. And I focus on transformation of health systems with a focus on food systems. So I look at how you can essentially look at a nationwide and look at the health issues and so forth, and how you do transform that. And I look at actually some of the folks who developed some of the oldest health hospital systems in the country. We had a big transformation in the food systems. Some of your listeners would know the Kellogg Foundation.
Sure.
Right. It came out of the folks that I'm actually studying my PhD in. So I go back into the 1860s and look at how they developed a system to bring about the transformation. And actually, they're the folks who gave us the breakfast cereal business. They gave us health systems. They were doing farms. They were doing schools. So I look at that whole systems and how you create collaboration.
So it's health through nutrition, though. It's through the foods that we're eating. Right? Food is medicine type of thing.
Yeah, food is medicine as well, for sure. And it touches on other things because health is broad. There's education and so forth. Right. So I'm looking at all of that. But in terms of what I'm practically doing is the foundation base of that strategy focuses on the food systems as the primary vehicle. It then builds all the different components with the education systems.
Very
and so
simple,
forth.
similar to what we do with urban farming.
Exactly.
Now, you're a glutton for punishment like me, and you as well. I know you're always 24/7 on your game. But you, in addition to trying to finish up that, and you have a dissertation and all that stuff you have to write.
Oh, my.
So I don't even, I've already asked enough questions. I can see you're starting to sweat thinking about it. But in addition to that, you have a business. Your wife has a business, and you have at least one nonprofit?
But yeah, at least two nonprofits.
Two nonprofits.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're all of them somewhat related to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just go in a little bit to what the two business models are, for profit, and the two nonprofits are.
Okay. In terms of the business, part of what we do is we've created them as social enterprises. Our big focus is essentially to try to develop to produce the healthiest food, right, in the most sustainable ways, and boost as much nutrition and provide that as food to alleviate food access in sometimes food deserts and so forth. So some of our biggest clients, actually the biggest client that we have right now is the Arizona Food Bank Network. That we became a big partner with during the COVID times when most people lost jobs and so forth and so on. So we were providing a lot of their food whilst they had a mission to boost the quality of the food that they had.
Sure.
So we worked with the city of Phoenix as well, and so both I'm doing the same thing, my wife is doing the same thing, and through that we're also working on innovations that we're doing. So we have partnership with the city of Phoenix to look at sustainable ways of farming. So they gave us a grant of $80,000 to do regenerative carbon farming, where we divert food waste and yard waste and develop products that we can use it as agricultural inputs. Right. So these are different things that we're doing through our business, but ultimately we're trying to obviously do some conservation and do some regenerative stuff whilst we're providing food access, healthy food access to our communities.
So soon, at some point, that degree will be finished, and that'll be a weight off your shoulders. Will you be teaching then? Because a lot of times you do a PhD to go and teach higher education. Is that something that you see yourself doing? I mean, you kind of are doing it already in your work.
Right, yeah.
But formally.
I was, I primarily, when I came for the PhD, the drive was essentially the practical side. I wanted to be more of a practitioner, but when you go through the process, I say, get indoctrinated really well, because essentially, they help you realize that, well, you can do both, right? Because ultimately, you're learning all of this, you're implementing all of this. You might as well share it with students. So, and got to teach at ASU a couple of times. So I know I'll be having a foot in the teaching as well as in the practitioner.
At least an adjunct professor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole concept of going to that level.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask you the name of your companies and that in a minute, but tell me about the mission of Green Living. I'm pretty familiar with it, but tell me about that mission and tell me a little about that history. So you finished at U of A, you came up here, you started working for other magazines. You kind of had to hone your craft first, right? Did your own, sold that. And you're a glutton for punishment too, because it's not a bit. None of these
It's not
industries
an
are easy,
easy-
right?
No,
Yeah, it's
farming,
a constant hustle.
Yeah.
24/7
So
compost.
tell me about that. Walk me through the journey a little bit, and then tell me about the mission.
So I started as a salesperson for the Apartment Guide magazine, became the publisher, and then my former business partner and I started a magazine called the Apartment Showcase because all the executives from Apartment Guide were going to Apartment Finder. So when we opened it, we know who was buying us. So we started, sold it in 3 years, stayed on with Apartment Finder. My business partner and I, in the beginning, stayed in contact. People came to him and said, "Why don't you start a lifestyle magazine in Scottsdale?" And he's like, "Wow, there's like none of those." So then they said, "Why don't you start a Green Living magazine?" And we did our due diligence, and there was nothing like it. And right now, there's no other green, eco-conscious magazine on a local or a national level after COVID. There's a few. USA Today had a quarterly one. Hawaii had one. The Midwest had one. So we're really sitting in a great position.
So,
Right now.
do you have a partner in Green Living?
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years in, I bought him out. And our mission is to educate, inspire, and empower people to make eco-conscious choices for a healthy life and healthy planet. And our vision is a world in which we live, work, and play for future generations.
Great. I got to remember, Joe wrote our mission, and I got to rewrite it in my own words because I'm like, what is it, Joe? So you have interviewed primarily local people, but you've got some international and national people too. But
Definitely. Vindava Shiva
how do you
and Deepak Chopra.
how do you get to a point where you get to meet with these people or solicit people? It's similar to what we're doing with the podcast, right? What's the process? I mean, walk someone through what the process of having a magazine is. You're a monthly magazine, so you have to have
10 times a year.
10 times.
So we don't print a magazine in February or July.
Which has got to be like, oh my God, thank God for February and July. but that's a lot of work that goes in. So I know it's just like when I had Agave Farms or any of the businesses I have, you're never quite off. The whole time you're like, how can I tell this person's story? Or how is this connecting with this,
Yep.
right?
Or how can
So
we
it's-
connect these people together? How can I help Rodney? How can I help Mike?
Right.
For example.
It's a constant thing, right? So on a monthly basis, how does the month start? Because you have a team of people, and I know you've got young writers. Some have been there for a while. Some want to work a part-time gig. Some work freelance, I'm sure. How do you do all of that? I mean, that's how
Well,
do you
you
publish it?
connect with different people who you want to go after and then look at their PR companies or their ad agencies or their press person to get your foot in the door, and then you've got to sell your story to them and then get them to talk to the producer or the world leader like Deepak Chopra or Vindava Shiva.
So they could take years sometimes to.
Yeah, there's some stories
this
that
in.
have taken 6 months or a year, especially with celebrities and if they're traveling
right.
and
Yeah,
if
you
you
get
don't
that
know
too.
them. And I've been lucky to meet some of them at like natural food expos and different things like that. And they're very connected. And I have a really good friend that's connected pretty well. She's who connected us to the Common Ground film
Right.
and the producer because she's good friends with the director. And so a lot of it all goes back to who you know and how can you help people and who can you connect with them.
So you feature different manufacturers of different products. You feature farmers.
Farmers, Bridget Pettis was on
right,
the
yeah.
cover. Mike, you've been on the cover as well. And then we'll have Deepak
You got to be
Chopra,
special to
celebrities.
be on the cover.
I know.
Finish that dissertation. Get you on the cover.
Yeah, there's opportunity.
We'll work hard. We'll work.
So you are bringing these people in, and how do you mix up? This is just a matter of telling stories, right? Or do you try to?
We
I'm
have
gonna
a
do
theme.
certain food, and then I'm going to do nutrition or makeup or sustainable products or national, international. How do you? What's the?
So we have
what's
an
kind of the
editorial calendar. So every year we have a health and wellness issue. And then March is our home issue. April's Earth Day. May is our women issue. June, July is we just switched it up. Now it is home again. And then we have health and wellness, or not health and wellness. September's fashion, October's our best of, November's food, and then December's holiday.
So
And
if you get someone who's connecting with food on the wrong month, you still do the interview, you still get the write up, you just hold it until that monthly publication.
Well, we have categories, and so food's one of the themes of the magazine. So we always have an article on fashion. We always have an article on businesses that are doing good, design, architecture, technology, home, style, beauty.
So we had Michelle. Oh, don't listen, Michelle. Can't remember your last name, but she was with a national television show, and I think I looked at the stats. She's had like 90 million viewers are on it, and it seems to me like her show is a show that's your magazine kind of, right? I mean, and great personality and connects with people and everything else, and a great show. I'll try to hook you two together because it's such a, and that's the whole thing, such a similarity in the things that we do. But sometimes we're all like beating our heads against the wall, just doing our thing. And it's hard to, a lot of times it's hard to just kind of keep breathing life into something. You and I have talked, and I always thought, you got to go national with what you're doing. I mean, it's because you're right, there is nothing. And we're in places now that we're meeting, like Joe was just in Rome at the climate summit, where there's 1 million people, but there's probably millions of people, but at the summit itself, there's 1,000 different organizations doing all things that could be in your magazine, and those stories really have to be out. And there really isn't as many platforms to go on as yours, and I don't always have time to go through every inch of it, but it's well done. The articles are well written. The magazine's always pretty. I like the digital one where the pages turn.
Flips.
Yeah, it's always been. I can't ever get my marketing people to do that. For some reason, they don't want to do that. But it's a cool thing.
We could possibly help you out.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how we can keep moving forward with our stuff. Now, Rodney, you and I are doing things that are similar. And I started writing books back before COVID, and mostly in COVID is when I started doing these books, because what else are you gonna do? We did food distributions, and you can only do so much exercise or whatever. You're stuck wherever you are in the world.
Make
And
so much bread or create so many healthy meals.
all of that, right? But so I started writing these books, but I didn't really think of them as books. I was just writing down things that I needed for the businesses. So we have the soil company. So I started writing one on compost and vermicompost. And what I was really doing is researching, right? And then I decided, well, you know what? This ties into larger global issues like climate change or agriculture itself. There's so many different ways of doing agriculture. If you're in 50% of the world does non-industrial agriculture, and a lot of it's small stakeholder farms that are rain-fed, and they're not using chemicals or equipment, but they're also not necessarily doing environmentally correct, sustainable farming. They may be growing the same crop over and over again and destroying soil values and stuff, but that's half the world. The other half is this industrial farming, and then there's this small stuff in the middle that is probably certainly less than 10%, I would think. That's what we call alternative farming practices, which are sustainable intensification. Organic is a designation in the U.S., but you have permaculture, which is, a big part of, somewhat inseparable from the concept of climate smart or regenerative. And you're right about one thing. I can never get the books. First of all, they're boring as hell. So I'm not a writer per se, so I've got to bring some stories back into them. I got to get the graphics into them. I've got to make sure they're edited correctly. I would hate to do what you do because just because I'm not good at it, right? But I'm trying to write this thing now for myself. And then, when we're doing farming, and we sell our products to large farmers, big organic companies, and we sell them to schools and to shelters and to home gardeners. We've got our products on Amazon now, their entire platform of different products. But you have to explain to people how this all fits in, right? So now these books, it seems like I'll work on this one, then I'll work on this one. I think this one is like 95% done. And then I go back 6 months later, I'm like, oh my God, it's so bad, But what I'm doing is in the process, I hear about something and I'm like, or I read a new book and I'm like, oh, this is so much better than this is kind of what I was trying to say, but it's so much better. And then I keep getting more and more and more to the point where I think I'm getting close to having pretty good, unique content, but I've done what you've done. This last year or so, I've gone back and looked at pre-industrial revolution books. So, some of the best books that I'm using are 10 Acres Enough from 1864, bestseller.
I need to check that.
Then there's another one on manures, like an amazing book written in 1854.
Oh, wow.
Darwin's books on worms back in the early 1800s. I mean, you go back, there's a guy who, Howard, that was a big ag guy in the British Empire, and he was kind of the first one who formalized composting using our same methods, but he was all labor instead of equipment. But so I look back and what the deal is back before everything was easy, before we took a magic pill and everything was easy, right? And we had all these processed foods and industrial systems. People had to operate their own farms at their own homes because a lot of people were. So part of the good part of industrialization was it freed people up from back-breaking labor and working in the sun and not, let's say I'm born into a farm family, but I'm really a musician or I'm a dancer or I'm something. I don't really want to do that or whatever. So part of it freed people up. So there's never black and white. And it certainly feeds the world, and we've got 8 billion of us now to feed. But the other part that's kind of sad is these family farms had family communities all over the world, but especially like in the U.S. And if you drive through some of these farm belt areas, millions of farms were, I think, if you believe in a conspiracy, I think they were put out of business. It became too impossible to be a small, and the USDA definitely supported larger farms because they were easier to control, which is also true. They were able to control pests and control the potential of harmful foods going into the system. But I look back at these books and that manure book, and it talks about how a farmer had to have everything figured out. There was never any waste. Whatever, if you had livestock, every part of that animal was used, and it was used with reverence, right? I mean, because these are animals that were somewhat like your pets, but they provided something for you and your family, and you made your own soap, you made your own, lotions, and you had your own food, and it was a diversified palette of food of things you were growing. So, and this whole ecosystem that we all lived in has very much completely changed, right? And now we're talking about urban farming, which is what you're involved with, and that's what the name of my entity is, Urban Farming Education. And it's not doing mass scale stuff per se. We work with in Africa with smallholder farms that could be 10 or 20 acres or whatever, smaller. But what it is the reason that we call it urban farming really is that people worldwide move together into cities, and they still have to grow food and eat food, and some of them need that sustenance. So what are the names of all these different entities? I can see one.
All right, yeah.
Machokoto. Oh, I'm getting really good at that. Family farms.
Right, yes.
That's one. What's the name of the other entity?
Yeah, so the way we look at it, Machokoto Family Farms is a collective of the multiple different organizations.
Oh, it is.
So when you look at those businesses and the nonprofits, so coming from what I'm doing in my PhD, the way you transform the world is through networks, through collaborations, right?
Yeah.
And so every single entity plays a unique role to build to something bigger. So even within our own family, we're trying to build and learn from what I'm studying. And so in this case, there are certain things that you can do more effectively, better, more efficiently from using a business model. There are certain things you can do more effectively and more efficiently using a nonprofit model.
Sure.
Right. And when you bring those together, you can actually create something bigger. So within hours, right? So the for-profit side, we have what my business is actually called Three Angels Livable Communities Initiative, right? And so that's Three Angels LCI for short. That's easier. So it's an LLC. So it sort of focuses on food production. And my wife as well is also has her own. Initially, she was going to. I saw she had a gift of nursery, nursery, not so much in the kids, but in terms of the raising of seedlings and plants, right? And so he started more on that side, but she's also gifted in greens and so forth. So she's got a Daphne's Fresh that's connected to that, where she focuses on greens and a lot of things like spinach and kales and so forth and so on. I'm more of the specialty on, I'll call it fruits. So you're talking about the watermelons, the cantaloupe, I also do the roots, like the onions, the green onions, and so forth. She does a lot of the brassicas. So we're working on that angle. The nonprofit side is we started in one nonprofit called Community Health Improvement Gardens, and the mission of that was essentially, particularly in Arizona, where you have a lot of organizations with these unutilized or underutilized spaces, right? And we're like, well, on one side, as we all know with our story with agave, the farmland is just disappearing, right? Development is here and it's here to stay, and so land is disappearing.
Right.
But at the same time, you got a lot of this need is growing, the population growing. I think we're almost like 4 million now, the fifth largest city, metropolitan area in city in the United States, even I think bigger than Philadelphia, if I remember correctly.
Right. Yeah.
So you got this, So you got this big need, and you got also this diverse population of people coming from Africa, South America, Asia, Middle East, Europe, and so forth. So there's a cultural demand for unique food products. So coming to that urban space, right? There's a lot of these unique products. If you think of Bianco, right? They're into the San Marzano tomatoes, right? Trying to do that at a large scale, you may not have the big demand, but you have those Italian, historically Italian type of restaurants who could use more of those San Marzano tomatoes. But you could have that match between an urban farmer producing just enough for what the Bianco needs, right? But you may not have the big supply.
And Bianco is the restaurateur.
Exactly.
People don't know.
Yeah. So you when you're thinking about that, even when we had the Afghanistan refugee community coming in here, they have their own specialty needs in terms of foods. The urban space gives you the small scale space to grow for that specific community in a way that it's not going to be it's going to be very business. Effective in a business sense, right? So you're not utilizing too much resource when you don't have the big demand. So even when you're talking about the angle, what you're talking about, the African, the work you're doing in Africa, Zimbabwe, which is the country I came from, had a significant economic collapse.
Yeah,
the way that the country was able to, well, the people were able to survive there was because of urban farming. A lot of the small-scale farmers were growing for themselves and for their neighbors. And so even though it was sort of small-scale, right, they collectively became a movement that helps people weather that kind of. Yeah, so so this
going
is
down
kind of
the streets, and we're in Bulawayo,
all right.
outside of Bulawayo, and a couple.
You got to take me when you go next time. All right, cool.
You got to take me when you go.
All right,
But,
all right.
yeah, we work with two brothers there, and Arnold, who we met at a food drive in Levine, who's here half the time, there half the time, from Zimbabwe as well, and he does the safaris, run African safaris, but he works with Tiki and his brother, and their family has had large land holdings. They had a 50,000 acre property that they turned into conservatory. So when you talk about conservation, this is, you got to go to Africa. Because
I'm ready.
there's and they have two 25,000 acre pieces right next to it. So you're talking 100,000 acres. Like, that's really hard for us to digest. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe the size of Tempe or something, you know? So it's huge. But 50 of it right now is currently set up for rewilding. So animals, so it's wild going to this farm and seeing zebras and warthogs and right on the farm. You know, I'm standing there and there's wild animals on the farm, but they're using a combination of modern agriculture. They've dammed up the river. Most of the year they don't need to have it dammed, but they dam up a portion of it when it dries, you know, starts to dry out, so they can keep going. But they are working with the community, raising broilers, and at a large scale, because one of them has a chicken feed company and a chick company where they sell, you know, I don't know, millions of chickens or something big time. But they get the people in the bush they give them something that they can make money on and profit on, and they're also brought in a different variety of steer, which now allows them to breed. The community can breed with that bull and have a larger meat. So, because up until then, they're in the bush killing animals. So the idea now is for people to buy into the idea of conservation and tourism. So it's just one of the million things. We're trying to get people to come to Africa with us next late May, June, on an ecotourism trip.
That's my passion.
Well, you can do safari right on the property, right? And you just have to see.
And there's places that you can go to rewild here in the United States too.
Right. Yeah, it's just different. If you've been to Africa,
it's probably like night and day. But.
Yeah. So it's but yes, the whole concept is that we're one planet, right? And you know, if you listen to Bob Marley, you know, one love, one planet, right? And the idea here is that the animals are part of that system. The people who live there, that have been there, indigenous, somewhat indigenous anyway, as much as any of us are indigenous, been there for 1,000 years anyway, right? And they are part of a system, and now they're in this world system. Yes, Zimbabwe had some political issues in which they, I think things, it depends on your philosophy. I think when in the, I think it was the late 90s, it was
late 90s, early 2000s.
Right. They took over and they kind of booted out all the what they considered non-nationals and appropriated land for everyone. Now, was that the right thing to do? The answer is yes. But how you do anything is what we call capacity building for community. And unfortunately, the people who got the land were never given the capacity to learn they didn't know the correct methods to farm it, nor did they have the resources to farm it. So it became a failed experiment. So sometimes that's what we see is we see unintended consequences of things that had, good intentions that didn't actually work. But, so yeah, when's the last time you were in Zimbabwe?
Man, the last time I was in Zimbabwe was 2013 when I went to pick up my bride. Got married. Daphne, you've met her, right? So that's when I had a 7-year long distance relationship. Didn't see her for that 7 years at all, and then went to get married a week before the wedding, right? And so that's the last time.
And we have another guy, that is from Malawi, that works here now, and he did the same thing. We went back, but and it's interesting because I would think it'd be more of a melting pot, but Africa is really tribal from a standpoint of you stay within your own group, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just is a thing.
Yeah. It's changing significantly as well. And I wanted to highlight on some of the things that you're talking about. And it's interesting. There's this Zimbabwean theme. Bridget Pettis with the Bridget Pettis Foundation, who used to be a player and a coach in the women NBA. Right, so she was a star, right? And she was one of the persons you had on the cover. I told you you were right. You need to be very special. So British, right? So she's going to Zimbabwe next year as well for some of the work that she's doing as well. But I wanted to emphasize on what you're talking about, the need for cross learning. One of the things that with some of the challenges that you're highlighting, even in that context, right? A lot of the brutal nature of trying to farm in Arizona provides an opportunity for innovative work, right? Even when we were at
you
Agave.
can go anywhere. If you can do it here,
yeah.
you can do it anywhere.
Right, yeah. And so a lot of the stuff, even with Agave Farm, some of the things, just simple basic drip irrigation, right? That was my first exposure to it through your operation, right? I didn't have access to that. I didn't have knowledge of that, right? But, you got to learn how to grow certain things. You got to manage water certain ways in the desert if you're going to try to grow anything. So a lot of those places, right, even drip irrigation, it was coming little by little, but there's so much cross-learning that can happen even between a Phoenix and an Africa, especially with the climate shifting that's happening, right? And so where you can no longer just rely on rainfall, right? And so there is, really, it's awesome that you're doing those kind of trips across these two different continents, because you'd be surprised how much learning can happen.
It's really about community. Yeah. Learning as a whole, because nothing can be done in a silo fashion. Right. That's why we definitely want to team up with you, and you're going to have to look at your May issue or whatever and say, hey, I'm going to be gone for the better part of 2 months, because you don't go over there. And if it depends on how much you want to see, but I've been to most of the countries now in the southern part of Africa. We started an operation in South Africa, in Soweto, but we ran into some scam artists when we were doing it. And so it's like anything in the world, right? You can get people anywhere that are doing things, but we're in Malawi now, but we're in multiple locations in Malawi. And you're 100% right. We have to be partnering with more and more NGOs. So I think I'm going to be doing a podcast in Germany in a few weeks with a group that does water for Africa. And I remember doing some marathons working for an organization called Water for Our World, but I don't know if they're still around. They were up in Phoenix as well, and they were putting water in. Well, I just as soon not have to put water in every place I go. Everybody wants a solar pump, and give us a borehole with a solar pump and tanks. And so there's resources involved that. My thought over in Africa is the same thought of farming everywhere, and that is what the first thing we have to do is protect the soil. Mm-hmm. So mulching the soil, keeping an armor from the sun, allowing when the rains do hit something to absorb instead of having it running off. That's the first thing. Learning the concepts of composting and vermicomposting, because now you can use organic methods of taking whatever waste you have and you can grow food. And I can't wait to have you come out there, but you're going to have to go from Zimbabwe to Malawi and then over to Zambia.
I wouldn't mind, yeah, because we'll probably should invite her for sure, because my wife and I are planning to be there right around the same time. So
Okay.
it might be a nice little.
And what part of Zimbabwe are you
It
from?
would be
Are you from
fantastic.
So
the
yeah,
city that?
I grew up in Harare, right?
Oh,
but
okay. You're in the jungle.
my
The real jungle. The
yeah, the
urban
real jungle, yeah, urban jungle. But my grandparents are based in Shirugui, so which is a little bit close to Bulawayo. So when we go, we want to do quite a bit of ag related stuff, particularly conservation and so forth. And my wife and I just funded a borehole at one of the churches there to help provide water as well. So so it'll be a fun trip if we can have you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So there's basically two main tribes in Zimbabwe. There's a lot of tribes, right?
Yeah.
But the two, was it Shoshan?
Shona and Ndebele.
Shona and Ndebele.
Yes.
So down south it was Ndebele in Bulawayo, and up where all the politicians and the power is, the smaller quantity of people who control the power is where you were in Harare.
Right, yes.
And that sides don't particularly like each other, or historically hasn't. But there are populations of people from here living here and here living there, and then there's been a great exodus going to South Africa, going to Zambia, because of the deterioration of the infrastructure. But it is coming back. They're inviting people back to work there. So great trip and you gotta. I mean, the problem.
Our readers love eco-conscious travel.
The problem is
responsible travel.
This is so difficult a thing to run that you're like, we got to get you out. Get out of your cage.
I'm
Shut
ready.
the magazine down for 2 months and get some of your people who want to see things, because it's such a beautiful area too. That southern part of Africa, the weather is a lot better than here, even with climate change, right? You got California style weather most of the year. And we're somewhere between 10 and 13 longitude. So certain plants, seeds grow in that area. You're kind of more equator. But Zimbabwe is kind of a dry country. Malawi's wetter than Zimbabwe for sure.
I think because you're in Bulawayo. Zimbabwe
Right.
is significantly, yeah.
But if you go up to Vec Falls, where it's red, you got all clay soils, and it's still pretty dry until you get to
because that's the
Zambezi, right?
Yeah, that region's called Matabeleland, and it's
Right.
significantly dry. But when you go to the side where Harare is and all
Up
that,
north.
it's significantly wet, where you actually have regions where they do rice, if you can believe that.
Right. Well, there's rice in Karanga, but that makes sense because it's right on the lake.
Yeah.
And anyway, we can go on millions stories on that, but tell me what. Well, I can't ask it, but what's going on with Living Green? Because you're never static. You're always moving. What do you
What's
have any
coming up?
great announcements coming soon?
We have a sustainable fashion event coming up in October, and then our Best of Arizona. So there's 30 different categories that you can nominate yourself or be nominated for. One of them is a nonprofit. So, and one may be a landscape company, restaurant, favorite drink, different things like that. And then there's some other interesting news that'll be coming out in the next couple months.
The next 4 months. Wow. Before the end of the year.
Yes.
Cool. That's cool. So, well, let's talk a little gossip about all the people we know that aren't here now that I haven't talked to in quite a while. I haven't talked to you in probably 4 or 5 years, right?
Maybe. I guess because COVID, yeah.
So we had our 2 chefs who were wonderful chefs, and they cooked in COVID for shelters, and we helped support them a little. We worked with the food bank, but we also worked with local farmers and people who would donate quite a bit of stuff. So let me ask you about, let's see, we have our 2 chefs, Lori
Harlig and Jennifer Johnson.
and what's going on with them right now?
Jennifer is got married, and she's in Italy, and she's boating with her husband all around the world. And Lori and Scott still have Amici Catering, and they're creating amazing food experiences for people.
kicking butt with what they're doing. Yeah. And Lori, we don't have to talk too much more because I'm jealous. You know.
You mean Jennifer?
I mean Jennifer. Yeah, right. So she's traveling the world on a boat, and her husband is in Milan, and they've shifted and moved over to there. So good for her. But great chefs, good people. Okay, let's see. We had another great chef who helped us a little during the process. Italian. Danielle.
Danielle.
Also quite
Danielle
a
Leone.
international
I think
chef.
she's not living here anymore. She
Yeah.
got married, and I think
No kidding.
I think she's in the Netherlands.
Oh wow.
I always thought she was married to the guy who did the soda. Is that the guy she married?
No,
A different guy.
correct.
Okay.
He's still here.
he
He
is.
still has the big marble soda.
And that was great soda, you know. And they
Ginger
donated
beer.
the ginger beer, and they donated a lot to us when we were doing our thing. And they had that VW bus that I tried to get, but anyway, that's not there. Who else did we work with now? Glenn is still around, as far as I know, and we actually took So one of the things we're doing with urban farming is we're writing up what I was calling. At first, I was calling lab reports because I was thinking school related. Then I realized and Peter didn't want that. So we started calling them white papers. They're not white papers either. So Joe came up with a word called field guides.
Okay.
So I'm trying to take and compact the compost book, the vermicompost book, the soils, you know, and then talking about seed and urban farming. And I'm trying to condense those into short guides. So we actually took what Glenn was doing with tomatoes, and we've got a video, and we have I think a 15-page guide on how to grow tomatoes in tough areas like Arizona, but also usable in any desert environment or in Africa as well. And that's using shade cloth, which is less expensive, and running your strings down so you could climb and run your drip, and using compost and that kind of thing. So that's one of them. But these are different things we're doing. We've got a couple of great people from the Extension Service that are on their own time writing some of these guides as well. And that's the whole idea of some of these extension services we have in the U.S. They're great resources for people who want to do farming or alternative farming. But the concept I have is work with the resources you have.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Here in the U.S., it's easy now. Oh, we'll use drip. Well, a lot of people can't afford drip, so you can, if you're still at a point where you're doing rain-fed agriculture, you got to work the soil and protect the soil with waste products. And that's how you can grow, and you got to know how to seed bank and use different things. So it's really interesting how we all get into our own orbits, and you're doing your stuff, but we're doing the same thing, and we're even talking. So it's important to have formats like Green Living magazine that kind of connect. And hopefully we see the expansion of that.
Well, it's all about community. So I'm really excited now to be connected to Rodney so I can maybe share his story, and then also talking about the work that you're doing, because what we really want to do is build a bigger eco-conscious community.
Yeah,
Because we're better together.
So the concept of sustainability, which is this broad term or word, part of it is and you brought it up, you need a profit and a nonprofit. Well, your nonprofit also has to be revenue-based if it wants to succeed long-term, and that's not easy. With our nonprofit, it's still me cutting a lot of checks, and we try to get a little grant money here and there, but grant monies come with strings, and you usually don't get a lot.
Right.
But there's some of that. There's some private finance that comes this way, and then we do programs that help us what we're doing. So when I started Agave Farms, and then we started the offshoot Urban Farming Education, I would go to schools and I'd say, hey, we want to build a garden in your school. And they go, well, why? And that would be the answer, is why. And then I went to one school area district, and they're like, well, we have a hard time getting financing to put the roof on, and we had to cut the football team, or we had to do this or this. We don't have time or money for the garden or whatever. So it really, instead of getting just irritated or mad, I had to come up with, well, what are the reasons why we urban farm, or we, whatever you want to call it, right? You're building a garden or a farm or mini farm. And so, and I ask everyone this, but tell me if these don't cover all the real categories. So one is what I call ecotherapy. So if you're farming with people with PTSD or the elderly, or somebody with autism or something like that, farming brings you back to the earth. So you're in kind of this rhythm with the planet, and it's quiet. It can be quiet, and it can be soothing, psychologically soothing, seeing life, that you're part of that growing of that life, and that you've mentored, how the soil worked and how you took care of these plants. So ecotherapy was my number one. The other one was sustenance. So when we're in Africa, nobody goes, there ain't no therapists in Malawi. You know what I mean? You're just trying to survive and keep your family fed and that kind of thing. So there's two things there. They need sustenance. If they're growing, they need to grow something, or raising animals that can feed them and feed their family. But it's more than just that. They're trying to find ways to make some money, so we call it agribusiness. So we're working on, with a lot of the students, we give them 9 chickens and 1 hen, and different ways of growing food to feed those chickens and hen, and they and their family turn that within a year to 200. Because it's that process as you're going, and they sell those for broilers, and then strange as it is, it's enough to pay for the students, if they're in boarding school, pay their tuition, and or if they go to college. So just that one little industry, but there's a lot of that. There's sunflowers, there's peanuts, there's different little micro businesses that were involved with funding, and small dollar amounts. The idea for someone is that at the end of a year, they have to give the 9 chickens and 1 hen back to the next student down. So the program is able to be self-fulfilling. Again, I don't have to cut checks. It works. And we're doing that in several places now where we're done. We've done chickens, and now they do it on their own. And they probably do it better than I do it. If you're working with a particular commodity, and you're working in this soil or that soil, and you're trying this, that, or the other, and you get it to work, you become the expert at that particular thing, which is kind of cool. We're doing it with soap manufacturing. So they can take seeds and crush for the oil, animal fats, and they can blend, and they can take fragrant plants like lavender and make soaps. And now they can sell that soap off, and they can make some money. So it's ecotherapy, sustenance, agribusiness, right? Then we talk about the next one is social. So we worked in a lot of shelters, whether they're the VA style veteran shelters, or an elderly shelter, or in a women's shelter, and a lot of times people will come into those shelters, and they're coming in a bad state psychologically, and then they will get a room, and they'll stay in that room. Well, the garden becomes this social format in which they can go down and participate with other people. And it's a form of ecotherapy, but it really is a social thing. And we see it when we had Agave Farms, all the different relationships that were going on with people. And that social part is pretty amazing. The social is also part of aesthetics. So because you're in a community. So the thing that killed me is Agave Farms cost me a fortune. I just was spending money left and right. I couldn't figure out a business model. But the neighbors, the real estate values went up big time in our area. As a matter of fact, the apartment complex across the way was charging garden premiums. to look over the garden. I'm like, man, give me $1 out of that at least. You know what I mean? But,
Sure.
So these are, different things. And then the last thing, let's see. So we went through ecotherapy, sustenance, agribusiness, social, which is a big one, and then the last one's education. So that's why we're urban farming education, and now we're taking Arizona standards, and we're writing curriculum from preschool to senior level in high school, and we're doing STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and we're doing that, and we do lesson plans. Again, volunteers helping with lesson plans that help Peter and some other colleagues write this curriculum. Our goal is to have the first 4 programs finished, hopefully this year. Those things tend to drag at times, but that at least gives us 4 programs for those, whatever that is, 13, 14 grade levels. And then ultimately we want to break it down year by year for each one. But that now, if you look at the Arizona standard, very similar to the U.S. standard, and we think that the conversion to be a U.S. standard base, and then give it away to other states in the union where they want to do the same thing we're doing, and in that tweaking of that model becomes pretty easy. So it starts with professional development for the teachers, learning how to teach STEM or STEAM, and be able to use outdoor classrooms and hands-on learning, because that's the generation we have to be really focused on, is the young generation of people, so that they can appreciate the planet and how it works at that level. And your level is important too, but you're talking to people who already have their minds made up. You talk to me all day long, I don't think anything gets through, and that's just the way it is, right? So unless there's a self-interest involved, if I'm doing something to grow a better tomato or a vegetable, then I'm going to learn. So these are so it's very similar to what you've got going on, and so we're doing similar things, and that's why working with other NGOs, that's what you should have, is an NGO party.
That's
with like-kind people. And the biggest thing is for people to buy into the idea that we are small communities, whether we're in a class in one school, or we're in a certain geographical area in Maricopa County, or the community at large, which would be the state of Arizona or the United States, or the whole continent of Africa, or whatever, the whole world. It's all one community when it comes down to it. It gets a little more complicated the more people you're involving, but that's where that broadcasting of Green Living Magazine comes into play. But the deal is that we can get so much more done as an NGO. And Joe, who's not here today, but he'll be back next week, but Joe's what he's good at is getting people to do stuff. So if I go into a community in Zimbabwe, I'm going to be, Joe, I'm going to get, hey, Joe, talk to Rodney, get Rodney to do something here too with us, right? Yeah. And the same thing with this group in Germany, if they can maybe come into our communities and help us put water in. So it's just one thing I don't have to do, and it allows us to accelerate. And the biggest thing is for us is working with people in the community to learn, because then they do become experts. There's kids and a lot of the teachers and some of the nuns in the hospital, and they've all become better at raising chickens than I could, and it's the same thing with Glenn learning how to do tomatoes. He was in his 70s, and I helped and told him different ideas, and I went out there and I was like, wow, I couldn't have done this better myself. He did a phenomenal job. So our idea is just to disseminate that information, and the more people we have and to help these communities realize how much power they actually have is the better. So
So I wanted to mention and sort of highlight the things you're finding, how it actually connects to what I would call old wisdom. So essentially, my PhD is based upon the writings of this woman who started driving this movement, this health conscious movement in the 1860s. Right, the Smithsonian Magazine, surprisingly, in 2015, found her to be one of the 100 most significant Americans of all time, along with Neil Armstrong and Michael Jackson. And
You're not talking about the Kellogg's. This
no,
is a,
no, it was actually the person who mentored the Kellogg's.
Ah.
So this woman is hardly unknown.
Do you remember her name?
Her name is Ellen G. White, right? So I better remember her because my PhD is based upon her. So she is the a person who actually
Began the movement.
Developed this social movement, essentially social movement focused on health, which then built healthcare systems, education systems. So it should build one of the largest education systems in the world, one of the largest hospital systems in the country. So if you would think about, if you were in the Florida side, you would know what's called the Adventist health system, or if you're in Ohio, you know what's called the Kettering's health system. If you're in Loma Linda, or you've seen the Blue Zones, you hear about what's called the Loma Linda folks. All of that was essentially the stuff she built. Right,
I'm going to have to read some of that.
Right, yeah,
and
exactly.
stick a little portion of it into the book.
Yeah, and essentially, her thinking was really highlighting a lot of the things you're talking about. Where, for example, you talk about that therapy element. She would say you would need it to have a hospital right there with a farming operation, and have the patients come out into the gardening space and help them in their essentially in their therapy, and both in terms of their social, their mental, and so forth. And along there, you needed to have a school as well, and make sure you connect the students into this operation and build that agribusiness aspect of things as well. And you're building essentially entrepreneurs out of this. And a lot of times these agri spaces, if you think about what you did with agave, right, it becomes an innovation space. So when Glenn came to me and said he wanted to grow too, right, so he was asking me all the different things he could do, he got excited.
He was absorbing knowledge from anyone who would give it to him.
So I said, went through, I said, and he was excited with the tomatoes, so I gave him some space at agave. So that became a space where somebody like Glenn was able to participate. And over time, as we were sharing with some of the technologies, like you saw him do the TPO system, and so I connected with some of the information over in North Carolina where they were using this, over close to the Raleigh area, that they were using this TPO system and then doing the essentially the trellising method and so forth and so on. That became a place of innovation. And so part of what I want to do is to also connect that to what she's doing with the magazine, with the role that I'm playing I'm a chair of the United States Department of Ag, the USDA Department of Agriculture. And here in Maricopa, we have what's called the Urban Ag Committee. And so what we're doing is essentially providing resources through the USDA to help a lot of the homes or individuals, whether they're homes, their backyard, their schools, and so forth, where they were struggling to figure out where do we get resources. Right. There are now federal resources ready to arm anyone, whether they're using their home, their church, their school property, their club property, whatever, to now make
it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and so a lot of these resources, folks have no idea, and particularly some of these monies are coming through. Some of them have been around from the Farm Bill, even in the Trump time, the Inflation Reduction Act during President Biden's time, and they will be there as well, regardless of what's the next administration to be. Right, and so a lot of these now, they're vehicles even from a federal level that are actually coming in and saying, how do we empower communities to essentially access and build these type of
one
things.
Portion of
all
our
different types of farms, and so I feel like we need to do an event to get the word out.
Right. Yeah.
I think you're right. One of the things that we talked about throughout the process is getting people connected, and your format is a great way to connect people. On our website, we have a thing that I started. It's just one of the million things I haven't. We've got what we call a wheel. We call it the Community of Gardens Wheel. So the idea was to get all the gardeners in Arizona to kind of join this forum, and we have resources for people to read. Okay, how do I grow a better cucumber, or where do I buy my shade cloth or whatever, and to have this forum. But it's a great way. if somebody needs help, like you were mentoring Rodney a little, or not
Glenn.
you're Rodney, you were mentoring Glenn.
Yeah.
But now Glenn's got an entire video, an entire little section that we want to send out, and we're sending it all over the world. So he's mentoring people, and it's that concept. And your magazine talks about holistic problem solving, and it's all about a circular economy, right? And so, you're involved with the agriculture space, but you can't just be involved with agriculture. There is a community around it that is influencing it and making things harder or easier to work with for people. And this is the concept of coming together as a community, at any location that you're at. So, yeah, we'll do something, but
we definitely have to do something. And it's like connecting the dots between, a lot of people don't think about fashion, and a lot of people don't think.
Well, fast fashion is a big.
And soil.
Yeah,
it's all
soil's huge.
connected.
Right, of course it is. Everything that's alive starts in the soil, goes up the line, and eventually becomes us, right? So, listeners have heard it here. You two are coming to Africa this next May, June. Just got to start working on it and getting some like-minded people. Because we're connected with Arnold, who runs safaris all over Zimbabwe that are pretty amazing. But I've been in safaris in Namibia and Botswana and South Africa, and they've got them in Malawi, so everywhere. So if anybody said, hey, I really want to visit this place, I can say, because getting around in Africa is a challenge.
Right,
you have to know which planes to get and which small planes, or, how to travel and what size group, and where you can go to do some of this. So we're planning on having some ecotourism where if you want to volunteer a little bit, you can work a half day doing this or doing that. You're in Africa, you want to see animals. I mean, because this is the last place on the planet where these kind of mammals exist, right? And so the soils are somewhat preserved from a standpoint that they never had the resources to embrace a lot of industrial agriculture. So I think it was where we all come from. I think it's going to be part of the solution in feeding the world in the future. I'm a believer in that, but you come see for yourself. So I appreciate both my guests today. I got a bottle of wine of grapes that we grew for each of you.
Thank you so much.
So Rodney Machokoto.
All right, yes.
And Dorie, I didn't say it as fast as you would have, 10 more times. And then Dorie Morales. Appreciate you guys being here. We'll be seeing a lot more of each other. You and I will be teaming up on some podcasts in the future with other people who are doing some pretty amazing things that I know I have to help you connect now with some people.
And I'll be able to connect you to some people.
Yeah, so it's going to
be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is. And it's, it's the good thing about what we do is that we have a passion for it, and we know that we're changing other people's lives. And it doesn't mean that we're changing the world per se, but we're changing. But if you are actually helping just a few people, that's better than, living a life where you're not helping anyone. And I think, what we're talking about is an entire philosophy that you're part of. Really, you should be part of the permaculture. Permaculture is the terminology, because their fundamental concepts are similar to yours, in what you're doing. But, there's some of these national television shows and platforms and stuff, and we definitely got to hook you up with some of those. And Rodney, get that degree.
I got to finish it. My advisor will be happy.
Yes.
So,
and thank you for the wine, for sure.
You bet. I want to read what you got, and I want to read because I've read about the Kellogg's and a lot of people, and I know that time period now. It's almost more than I know our time period, because I've read so many books in that, the late 1700s all the way to the late 1800s. and how that culture, how America was really built, was built on farms and transportation, and so really cool stuff that you're
Yeah, I need her gift to write. If I can write it well,
wouldn't that be
with
good?
with that, if I'm able to frame it well, it will essentially condenses how you build a system. That is a social movement to
The
transform
hardest part
any
is
issue.
the hardest part with these books, really, because now I've got books because I read a book and I take notes and I stick it in and then I move stuff around, and then the hardest part is now you got to write it and turn it into yours and to create a story for it, right? But I talked to one editor and I was like, I just don't know how to pare it down and cut it down. There's too much stuff and it's all important stuff or whatever. And he goes, well, you've come up with what all writers eventually come to. And I was like, well, what's that? And he goes, you've figured out now you're at a point where how do you kill your darling?
Ooh.
And that's it, because you got to butcher it, and you're like, you can't take that out, you can't take that out, you can't. But at the same time, we all read books, and we want to read a book that is well
Engaging.
written and condensed, and it keeps our interest, right. And the ones I've got right now, they're people that read feedback as well. It's very dense.
Sounds like my
So am
PhD,
I, right?
my dissertation. Sounds like my dissertation, for
Right,
sure.
and it's like you gotta simplify things. Albert Einstein, at one point, he was in a lecture, and I think he was discussing the theory of relativity, and he forgot, part of his own theory, right? And somebody was like flabbergasted and said, "How could you forget, this concept or whatever? You're the guy who came up with it all or whatever." And he looked at him and said, "I don't have to remember everything. I need to remember the book that it was in."
All right.
In other words, where's your reference material or whatever. But anyway,
Yeah,
great
thank you so
having you
much.
guys. I
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much.
And we'll, of course, stay in touch with all the things we're working on.
Okay.
Take care. Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.